Night falls over war-torn Europe. It's early 1944, and the world is holding its breath. For nearly 5 years, the Axis powers have dominated the continent. France is still under occupation, the Nazi war machine stands strong across Western Europe, and the Allies, Britain, America and their partners, are preparing for the single most ambitious invasion in human history. The world knows it will happen soon. Even Hitler knows it. The question isn't if, it's where. The Allies plan to launch an assault on Nazi-occupied France, a massive landing that will turn the tide of the war. But there's a deadly catch. If Hitler learns the invasion's true location, the beaches of Normandy, he'll send his divisions to crush it before it even begins. One wrong move, one leaked clue, and the operation could fail before the first soldier sets foot on shore. The stakes couldn't be higher. The success or failure of Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day, will decide not just the fate of Europe, but the entire course of the war. So Allied intelligence faces an impossible problem. How do you deceive the most paranoid dictator in the world? How do you convince Hitler to defend the wrong coast, without him realizing it's all an illusion? The answer would come not from generals or spies, but from artists, engineers, and stage designers. It began quietly, in a handful of small offices across London and Washington. Intelligence officers brainstormed elaborate deceptions, fake troop movements, coded messages, double agents. But none of them went far enough. What the Allies needed was not just misinformation, they needed a phantom army. An army that didn't exist. An army that could be seen, heard and tracked, but not touched. An army that could fool German reconnaissance, confuse their radio intercepts, and convince the Nazi high command that the invasion force was gathering, somewhere else entirely. That idea was so insane, so theatrical, that only one kind of mind could pull it off, the kind that knows how to make an audience believe the unbelievable. And so, from art schools, Hollywood studios and technical units, they began assembling a team unlike any other in military history. They called it the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but the men who served in it would later earn a more fitting name, the Ghost Army. By the spring of 1944, this Ghost Army was ready. Its mission, to deceive the German war machine using nothing but inflatable tanks, sound recordings, fake radio networks, and sheer imagination. They would operate in the shadows, moving invisibly alongside the real army, creating the illusion of divisions that didn't exist. To the enemy it would look like tens of thousands of men, tanks and vehicles massing for attack. In reality, it was only a few hundred artists, sound engineers and illusionists. The war was about to enter its strangest, most creative phase, a battle not of bullets, but of perception. This was the war of shadows, a war where rubber tanks, paint and sound would become deadlier than bullets, and where a handful of artists would change the course of history. In early 1944, while tanks rolled across Europe and bombers filled the skies, a small group of officers gathered in a secret room in London. Their mission wasn't to plan an attack or coordinate supplies, it was to build an illusion. The idea sounded like something out of a stage play, not a war strategy. What if we could trick the enemy into believing there's an army where none exists? What if we could create entire divisions out of thin air? Forces so convincing that even German reconnaissance planes and radio operators couldn't tell the difference. It was an audacious plan. But the Allies knew that deception could win battles before they were even fought, and so a new kind of weapon was born, one made of rubber, light and sound. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Officially, it was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Unofficially, it became known by a more fitting name, the Ghost Army. The unit was formed under the direction of the US Army's Psychological Warfare Branch. It consisted of 1,100 men, drawn not from combat divisions but from art schools, advertising agencies, and Hollywood sound stages. Their backgrounds were unlike any other soldiers in the war, painters who'd once filled New York galleries, set designers who built Broadway stages, sound engineers who knew how to make an audience believe anything they heard, radio operators who could mimic the chatter of entire divisions. One of them, Bill Blass, would later become a world-famous fashion designer. Another, Ellsworth Kelly, would go on to redefine modern art. But before fame, they were soldiers. Soldiers armed not with rifles, but with brushes, amplifiers, and deception. Training for illusion. They trained at Camp Forest, Tennessee, and later at Camp Pine, New York. But their drills didn't involve target practice. They practiced setting up fake armies. They learned how to inflate full-sized rubber Sherman tanks in minutes, set up decoy artillery positions, lay out fake tire tracks to fool aerial reconnaissance, create radio traffic that sounded exactly like a real armoured division on the move. Sound experts worked with recordings of engines, trucks, and construction noises, mixing them into field-ready tracks that could be blasted from hidden loudspeakers miles away. When the Germans listened, it would sound like an entire armoured column moving through the night. Even camouflage artists were trained to uncamouflage, to make fake units visible enough to lure German spies, but not so obvious as to give away the ruse. This was a strange new kind of warfare, where art replaced firepower and creativity became a weapon. The secret orders. Their orders came directly from the highest levels of command, but their work had to remain invisible. They were told that if captured, they could never reveal the truth of their mission. To the outside world, they were just another logistics unit. But in reality, their task was to manipulate the very fabric of the battlefield. They would move constantly, always just behind or ahead of the front lines. Each time, they'd appear as a different division, the 2nd Armoured one week, the 9th Infantry the next, a shape-shifting army designed to confuse German intelligence. The plan was bold. The risks were enormous, but if it worked, it could save tens of thousands of lives during the coming invasion. And as D-Day approached, the Ghost Army prepared for its first real performance, a deception so elaborate that even Hitler himself would believe it. When the Ghost Army finally deployed to Europe, the men carried not rifles and mortars, but rubber, wood, and sound equipment. Their battlefield was not fought with bullets, but with illusion. Every operation they executed required imagination, precision, and the understanding of how people and armies perceive reality. They were unlike any other soldiers in the war. By day they inflated rubber tanks, life-sized replicas of Sherman and Stuart tanks that looked solid from the air, but weighed almost nothing. By night, they staged entire army movements, lighting up fake campfires, setting up decoy tents, and broadcasting the sounds of engines and machinery echoing across the countryside. To the Germans watching through binoculars or listening to radio intercepts, it seemed like a massive American division was mobilizing. In truth, it was only a few dozen men hidden among the props. The most striking part of their operation was the visual deception. Using inflatable tanks, jeeps, trucks, and artillery, they could transform an empty field into what looked like a heavily fortified military base within hours. They used lightweight canvas and air pumps to erect hundreds of false vehicles. From above, German reconnaissance planes would see perfectly aligned tank formations, camouflaged artillery batteries, and columns of trucks ready to advance. The trick worked because the soldiers paid attention to every detail. They even left fake tire tracks, dug trenches, and staged maintenance crews to sell the illusion. Everything was done with the same precision as a Hollywood movie set, except here, the audience was the enemy, and the stakes were life or death. Sound was their next weapon. Engineers from the Army's Signal Corps recorded hundreds of real sounds: trucks starting, tanks moving, men marching, hammers striking metal, and mixed them into 30-minute loops. These recordings were played through powerful loudspeakers mounted on jeeps, projecting the sound up to 15 miles away. To an enemy listener, it would seem like an entire armoured division was assembling just beyond the trees. They could simulate a bridge being built, a convoy on the move, or even the rumble of tanks crossing a river, all with nothing but speakers and tape reels. Radio was another crucial part of the act. The Ghost Army's radio operators studied the communication patterns of real divisions, the way they signed off messages, their timing, their mistakes, and then imitated them perfectly. They created entire fake radio networks, transmitting encrypted chatter around the clock. German intelligence, always monitoring the airwaves, would pick up the signals and believe a real army was on the move. Every signal, every pause, every word was carefully planned to fit into the grand illusion. The artists and designers also added their own touch. They created realistic markings, fake insignias, and even uniforms from other divisions. Some soldiers posed as officers, driving jeeps into local towns, accidentally dropping hints to spies about where their unit was heading next. They even forged official documents and left them to be discovered. Every lie reinforced another until the illusion was complete. Their performances were so convincing that even friendly troops sometimes mistook the Ghost Army for the real divisions they were imitating. On more than one occasion, American units tried to report for orders under a commander who didn't exist. But while the Ghost Army's work might sound playful, their missions were incredibly dangerous. They operated close to the front lines, often within artillery range, and if their deception failed, they would have no real weapons to defend themselves. Still, they pressed on, because their success meant something bigger than medals or recognition. It meant saving lives, by fooling the enemy into firing at shadows. Their first real test came after D-Day, in the summer of 1944. As Allied forces broke through Normandy and began pushing across France, the Ghost Army received their orders: create the illusion of a massive American division preparing to attack, but in the wrong place. It was called Operation Brest, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. German artillery and armoured divisions were still holding key positions along the French coast, threatening to stall the Allied advance. To distract them, the Ghost Army would have to convince the enemy that a full US division, more than 20,000 men, was massing nearby. In reality, fewer than 1,100 men made up the Ghost Army. But they had a weapon far more powerful than numbers: deception. In open fields outside Brest, they began their illusion. Inflatable tanks were rolled out, inflated, and positioned as if ready for battle. From the air they looked flawless, the same shadows, shapes, and patterns as real tanks. Fake artillery guns were placed on ridges, their barrels pointed toward enemy lines. Camouflage nets covered everything, completing the illusion of a hidden but deadly force. Meanwhile, the sound crew got to work. Huge speakers blared the noise of trucks, tanks, and heavy machinery day and night. From miles away, it sounded like a division building up for a major offensive. German scouts reported hearing engines rumbling and metal clanking in the distance. But the deception didn't stop there. The radio team mimicked the communication style of a real division, using authentic call signs, encryption patterns, and even daily message habits. German intelligence listening in believed the Americans were preparing for a large-scale push. To sell the story even further, a few Ghost Army soldiers disguised themselves as officers from the fake division and visited nearby villages. They accidentally let slip rumours about a coming attack. Some left behind forged documents and fake orders designed to be intercepted. The Germans took the bait. They shifted reinforcements and artillery toward the decoy position, while the real Allied forces attacked from another direction. It worked. Perfectly. The deception saved countless Allied lives and sped up the liberation of northern France. Encouraged by their success, the Ghost Army was assigned to even bolder missions, each one more dangerous than the last, and each one pushing the limits of illusion and creativity on the battlefield. One of their most daring operations would come months later, in the winter of 1945, as the Allies prepared for one of the final pushes into Germany itself. It was a mission so audacious that, had it failed, thousands could have died. By early 1945, the war in Europe was reaching its climax. The Allies were advancing toward Germany's industrial heartland, and one final obstacle stood in their way: the Rhine River. Crossing it meant breaking into the core of the Third Reich. Every German unit left in the West was preparing to defend it to the last man. For General Eisenhower's forces, success depended on surprise. But how do you surprise an enemy who's watching every move you make? That's where the Ghost Army came in. Their mission was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. Convince the Germans that the main Allied crossing would take place miles away from the real point of attack. The operation was codenamed Viersen. In late March 1945, while the real US Ninth Army secretly prepared to cross the Rhine further north, the Ghost Army began constructing an elaborate decoy to the south, a phantom invasion. For days, small teams worked non-stop, inflating hundreds of dummy tanks, trucks, and artillery guns. They arranged them in battle formations visible to German reconnaissance aircraft. From the air, it looked like a major armoured force had massed along the riverbank, preparing for a full-scale assault. The sound engineers created an audio landscape of chaos: tanks clattering, pontoon bridges being built, boats being hauled into the water, engines roaring to life. These sounds echoed through the night, reaching German listening posts across the river. Meanwhile, the radio deception team played their part perfectly. They imitated the signal chatter of the real Ninth Army, using coded transmissions that made it seem as though the attack was imminent in their sector. Every word, every pause, every call sign had to match the authentic communication style of the real divisions. The Germans believed what they heard and what they saw. Their artillery shifted south. Their scouts reported heavy troop build-up in the decoy area. For 3 tense days, the Ghost Army lived inside their illusion, completely exposed to enemy fire. They had no real defences, only rubber, canvas, and courage. If the Germans had launched a counterattack, they would have been annihilated, but the deception held. On March 23, 1945, while German forces waited for the Phantom Army to strike in the south, the real Allied troops launched a massive crossing several miles north at Wesel. The Germans were caught off guard. Within hours, Allied forces had secured a bridgehead across the Rhine, a turning point that opened the path to the heart of Germany. When the operation ended, the Ghost Army quietly packed up their props and vanished once again, leaving nothing behind but tyre tracks, footprints, and the wreckage of inflatable tanks. Their work had no medals, no headlines, and no public recognition. But generals who knew the truth credited them with saving thousands of lives. Their deception had not only fooled the enemy, it had changed the course of the war. After the Rhine operation, the war in Europe was nearly over. Germany's armies were collapsing, cities lay in ruins, and the Allies were advancing faster than ever before. The Ghost Army continued to operate until the final weeks of the conflict, staging a few last deceptions to protect advancing troops, but by then their strange mission was almost complete. When victory finally came in May 1945, there was no parade for them, no headlines announcing their heroism. The men of the Ghost Army quietly packed up their rubber tanks, their sound trucks, and their fake radios, and went home. Their work remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. For decades, almost no one outside the military even knew they existed. Their operations were classified, their names erased from official reports. Families of the soldiers who served never knew the danger they faced, or the crucial role they played in deceiving one of the most powerful armies in history. Many of them went on to become artists, designers, engineers, the same kind of creative minds who had made their wartime illusions possible. Some became well-known figures in American art and design, carrying the lessons of deception, illusion, and creativity into peacetime. It wasn't until the 1990s that the truth began to surface. Declassified documents and first-hand accounts revealed the extraordinary scale of their missions, from France to Germany, and how their fake armies had diverted enemy forces, saving tens of thousands of Allied soldiers. Historians were astonished by the ingenuity behind the operations. Inflatable tanks, recorded soundscapes, radio mimicry, and theatrical staging, all combined into a seamless performance of warfare unlike anything before or since. In 2013, the Ghost Army finally received formal recognition from the US government. The surviving members were honoured for their courage and creativity, and the story that had been hidden for half a century was finally told to the world. Their motto had been simple: we fooled the enemy by looking like what we were not. But behind those words lay something deeper, a reminder that war isn't only fought with bullets and bombs, but with imagination. These men turned art into armour, illusion into a weapon, and deception into a way to save lives. And though most of their names are forgotten, their legacy endures, proof that sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones no one ever sees.